You're listening to Learning Leader Spotlight, interviews with corporate L&D leaders. On each episode, we sit down with key industry experts to discover more about what's happening in the world of learning and development, from current trends and insights to the most valuable lessons learned along the way. Join us for a fresh perspective on all things training and the best direction forward.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Learning Leader Spotlight podcast. And today we have a very special guest. Before we get started on that, I just want to share with you a little bit about the podcast. So I am your host today, Lori Fancher. I'm a relationship manager for Training Pros. Training Pros is an L&D contract staffing company. What we like to say at Training Pros is when you have more projects than people, let us help you find the best consultant so that you can start your project with confidence. So our special guest today is a wonderful thought leader in the L&D space. He is the Director of Talent and Learning at Synovus Bank, and his name is Zach Beasley. Welcome, Zach.
Hey, Lori, nice to be here. Thank you.
Of course. Yes, we're happy to have you. So could you give our audience a 60-second overview, a day in the life? Who is Zach and what do you do in the L&D space?
Yes, no, thank you, Lori. I appreciate the question. So as you said, I am the Director of Enterprise Learning for Synovus Financial, Synovus Bank. And so really what that entails is I have the responsibility of overseeing the effective execution and impact of all of our core learning and development programs across the enterprise, consisting of about 5,000 people. That looks in terms of areas such as I'm responsible for our strategic internal consulting within our learning space. So those folks who partner with our business leaders and support service units also have responsibility over our learning facilitation team. So the folks executing the delivery of content, learning measurement, and then our operations, content, and learning technologies. So our LMS, our instructional design organization, et cetera. And then some other activities such as change impact and enterprise project management. And then lastly, probably the most important part of my job is partnering with our key constituents and peers across HR as well as the organization, really around things like executive coaching, relationship management, et cetera.
That's a mouthful, Zach. That's a lot. I'm so glad you're with us today. I'm sure you'll be able to share a lot of great information about the business of L&D because you've got the full scope of it. So what first attracted you to the L&D field?
So interestingly, my journey started more in the producer side and in terms of sales, et cetera. I did go to a liberal arts education background. And so learning how to learn, I didn't realize how important that was. And then I got in this space and just realized just how important it was. And so I think that had a great deal of impact in ultimately landing. But interestingly, I decided to shift gears after a couple of years in sales and then bank to public education. So went through that process, got a certification, was going to be a public educator. And then my son was born about maybe 30 days before I was going to take my first job and shifted everything for me. And so long story short, 2014, I made a shift from where I was into L&D, actually through an opportunity that didn't see coming. And it was probably the best decision I ever made. The major driver of that decision-making had everything to do with wanting to have a more broad impact on the people with whom I worked. So I had a small group of teams I led, et cetera, but being able to impact in this currently 5,000 people and more was really what drew me to the space.
Awesome. I love that question. It's always interesting to learn more about how folks landed in the L&D space.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. So when we think about where L&D has been over the last few years, what have you seen as the most impactful changes that we've experienced in the field in the last few years?
Yeah, I think of this question, I think of a couple things that have really hit, and some of them are very recent. And so kind of start with probably the most impactful. But as our culture has shifted, we think about the way in which people consume information, right? So social, in the moment, kind of the old school of the JIT, just-in-time inventory and just-in-time has really moved into our space, I think. So whether it started with micro-learning and making things shorter and more digestible, and now we've got really the advent of in-the-moment learning. So how do I in the moment of I'm doing something and I need help or an answer, get it. And so I think that's probably been the most impactful change we've experienced, at least for me and the team, is just that speed of needing information more readily and more in the moment. Not necessarily I learned it 6 months ago and then I'm going to pull out my book off the shelf and flip to page 72 and be able to get it. And so how do we make those experiences that way? I think has been a significant impact in what we do.
Awesome. Yes. So, where do you see us headed in the next few years?
Whew, it's the crystal ball question, Lori, and it's funny. I think about this a lot, actually. It's probably one of the things I spend a fair amount of time both researching articles and things which I know we'll talk about a little later, but this concept of future state 5 to 10 years, and I think I'd almost say it might be more like 2 to 3, and then what's gonna change from 3 to the next 5 to then get, I mean, it may be a 180, but right now, the 2 things on my mind that I focus on is generative AI. Like, how is that going to impact what we do? And that's everything from, just the amount of information someone can take in, but also how it impacts the team and the work we do today. And then simulation-based training. I'm talking about AI simulation, AI coaching, the ability to adapt where you can audibly get feedback in real time around a particular topic or subject area. What does that really look like? And so what I think that leads to, at least the current hypothesis for me, is how different and much more is human discernment around the outputs of these automations and other advancements going to be needed in terms of critical thinking. How do I decide? You think about today, if you Google something, the first response that comes up is a Gen AI sort of summation of whatever articles and information it's pulled from. And so it's almost the moment of deducing, is that fact and true, or do I need to go fact check that source of that information? So I think it's going to be a lot of that kind of work, but those are the things I think when we look at it is how do we employ, generative AI, et cetera, in what we do, and how does that again shape what we do? And maybe the best way to say it in a sobering moment for me is, if today I'm someone who leans on 30 years of my knowledge to create content or put together some type of presentation, et cetera, and that might take me, 4 weeks, and now that can be done in 4 minutes with Copilot or ChatGPT. I mean, that's a sobering moment of like, oh wow, I've literally winnowed down my experience to something that can reproduce it in a tenth of the time. So
Yeah, I know it's a very exciting time for us in the L&D space, and one that a lot of folks are wondering how exactly is this going to affect our capability going forward? And we'll have to wait and see for a lot of those answers.
I I think you're right.
So if you had 10 times the budget,
Yes.
what would you spend the money on when it comes to this future of L&D and your team and developing your team and getting the work done?
Yeah. So funny. I enjoy this question mainly because you get to pie in the sky, right? And if money was no object, and then come back down to, so now it's an object. What was that? But right now, your question, I think, for 10 times budget, one of them is, there's kind of 3 things. One is algorithmic or predictive learning. And so when I think about learning experience platforms, as that continues to push into the organization, into the marketplace, kind of that recommended next learning. So, you think about whether your Netflix experience or if you've gone and shopped on an app, right? What's the number one thing at the bottom of that? It's like, here, so-and-so also bought this, or, what does that look like from a learning perspective? You took this, so here are other things. And there's already, organizations and programs that do that. But then also, as I'm in the flow of work, I'm thinking of overlays, et cetera. If I'm using a system to do my work or another process flow automation, will we get that point where I'd love to be able to bring in stuff that says, it looks like you're trying to do this, and it almost prompts you, to the next thing. And I know there are several out there that do something like that, but thinking about how that would embody really how we do things differently. I think the second thing for me, and this is maybe more specific to our organization, I would love to expand our services as we continue to grow as an organization to be thinking more of a global learning partner or global learning solutions. And by global, I mean for all of the enterprise kind of proportionally equally, where, resources will be much more plentiful to do so. So whether that's certifications for groups to continue to continuing education, or I have an interest in moving to a space. And it's not something where we're happy to help you find the opportunity, but you then need to go pay for it outside, things like that. But how do we curate those experiences inside the organization? And I think to your point at the beginning, for me, the biggest one, and I saved for last, was kind of the people part, right? And so connections, experiences, both for the team internally, how to reskill, upskill our internal team, but then also those folks. Our CEO recently talked about how the push to bring back and continue to have person-to-person interactions in person. Like, let's spend the time and energy to get back to talking about that and meeting that way and be purposeful in those moments. So I think we're starting to see a shift a little bit back there as well.
Yeah, and if I could just tag a little bit on to that last question when it comes to people and your team, uh, what is the most important skill that you think is going to be important for the folks on your team to have as you move them forward?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and we've actually kind of started working on it a little bit. And that's mentioned earlier in the scope of, as we think about AI and Gen AI and everything else we're on board, is the ability to critically think and really think differently. So I know a lot of times we talk about growth mindset versus fixed mindset, and all that's true. This to me is about what I've seen, at least, is the more and more folks that come, particularly whether it's through post-secondary education or as they're coming out, there's a lot of rubric-based approach to things, right? So I'm going through and doing something that hit this target, right? So it's very clear I know what I'm doing. Versus, do we have a natural curiosity of, I wonder why that response was that way. I'm going to go pursue learning about that job or that function so that I have a better idea of why they are pursuing that. Give you a very specific example. So recently I was talking with one of my HR consulting partners, and we were back and forth about a conversation. They made a statement, and I said, I'd really like to understand more about how you come to your decision making. What does that look like? So I decided to purchase some stuff, and I want to study for my SHRM and go acquire that. The certification is nice, but it's really, I'm very interested in, like, how were they thinking the way they are, different from how L&D thinks, and how do we come to those conclusions? So that's an example of what I'm interested in looking for, which seems to be very challenging. Not that there's not a natural pursuit of, I want to do something next, versus I want to learn something next. And I think that's, for me, the harder skill to find, number one. And then that kind of dovetails in number two, which is, then when we think about folks and even my team, do they know how to learn? So it's one thing to want to, something to know how to. And so am I motivated to do that? Do I know how to go find sources? Am I willing to spend the time? And in a world where, frankly, the great thing about technology is it really impacts our lives, allows us to do more, it creates efficiencies. I also think it sometimes covers gaps. And if we're not always paying attention to those gaps, we forget, and some of us may remember 20 years ago, if you went out grocery shopping or something and you forgot something on your list, you weren't sure, you couldn't pull up your phone. You weren't just dialing somebody, you may have found a payphone. Now you can almost look at inside your fridge on your smartphone, right? It's a totally different world. So sometimes those gaps are covered. Do I know how to unlearn and relearn as I move forward, or is this something already doing it for me? So there's opportunity there.
Well, I love that. How to unlearn and relearn as an important skill moving us forward. So true. Thank you. So you've been on this journey now for a long time. You've got these great plans for your team. Who was it that made the biggest impact on you in your career in the space of L&D?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question. We all have those people, right? You have those people too. And so for me, there's a number of people I would give credit to for different points, but I think from a learning perspective, probably the most impactful person is actually a former boss I had at a prior firm. Is still a personal friend, and I would say a mentor. But what I learned most from him is the consulting piece and how to do that. And what was interesting is he did not come from learning; he came from a true consulting background. So he brought a skill set and translated it over into learning. And so having that was invaluable to me, because it really taught me how to think differently and think more like I was the other end of the learning sticks. I was the sponsor. I was the executive asking for something. So I have a appreciation for that side. So when I ask questions, when I work with the team, we're thinking about it from that lens, which I think allows them to be more effective, more value added, all the buzzwords I could tie to it. But he was instrumental. His name was Wayne Zitch. He was instrumental in my really evolution of how I was thinking about doing things, and opened my eyes to some different approaches, both in how he interacted with people, strategic thinking, again, the consulting element, performance consulting element of from learning. And so very appreciative for those experiences. And really, yeah, the mentorship and the ongoing friendship.
That's so awesome and so important to have that consultative background
Yeah.
in the work that we do.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So you mentioned you're on top of things when it comes to research and you're looking at what's ahead all the time for you, your team in the field of L&D. Where do you go for industry news and information?
So glad you asked, and it's fascinating to me. I will say it this way: I am not a single source person. I think, and part of that was back to my undergrad education. You always had multiple sources. I remember being grilled for not. So I learned very early on, you better have multiple sources of information, both that support and sometimes are opposed to your point of view is a nice, healthy way to look at it. So, honestly, Lori, speaking with you and training pros and other vendor partners is one source of information. So just hearing kind of what's going on in that marketplace gives me a perspective. Obviously, from a learning gauge, I could point at things like I do read LinkedIn and go to LinkedIn Learning, our Open Sesame partnership, training magazine, some other industries such as that. I have a Gartner access point, so looking at their research. So there's just a number of industry ways of gathering, and I think that you kind of take all that together and then decide what's really best for your organization and what you want to adapt and adopt. So whether it's peers, whether it's those sources, all those things really help. And then because of the organization I work for, understanding what's going on in the various forms of financial services. So American Banker stuff, there's other resources that we lean on, different associations, et cetera. And we, interestingly, I imagine this is like other places. There's a ton of internal content creation that keeps people very aware. Again, the bias is it just our perspective, or how are we gaining that perspective? So a lot of times there's article link sourced and go kind of read it for yourself. So it takes a little extra time, but a lot of times I can validate, how those things look. So that was probably a longer winded answer than you were looking for, but it's never a single source of truth.
Yeah, I love that you incorporate the industry news in there, that you're looking at what's going on in the banking industry and you've got your finger on the pulse of that as well. Awesome. So thinking about all those new folks coming into the L&D space, what is the one book that you would recommend to the new folks that they must read coming into the field?
Wow. It's a fascinating. It's really a very fascinating question. If I had to pick one book, think about that. I'll say it this way: if I were coming in as an L&D leader, and maybe even just L&D in general, probably there's tons of books that are profound. I can think about The Value of Learning, and there's leadership pipeline books, and there's all kinds of different, competency books for your improvement, et cetera. But probably the one that most impacted me in terms of how I lead is The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. I really enjoy the lessons. We actually did a book study when I came in and took on the group, and the intentionality behind it. And again, full marks for a prior leader, prior firm who did this similar thing, but it really resonated with the team in terms of how you apply the lessons in there. And there was something for everybody. A lot of storytelling. It's an easier read for folks. It's not as technical, which helps a lot of people relate and get quick adoption to it. But I really think that was a game changer for us in terms of it really helped me reset the culture. Was a way for me to come in and not look like I'm just in there to make change for change's sake, that there's an intentionality behind it. And this is what we're trying to accomplish. So it proved to be a really good decision, but I think that'd be the book I would say.
Awesome. I'm going to have to check that one out. I haven't heard of that one before.
Yes, I would highly recommend.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Zach, thank you so much for being on our guest today on the Learning Leader Spotlight.
No, it's a pleasure, Lori, and I appreciate y'all's partnership. And it's always excellent to be a part of this, and hopefully it spurs more conversation, which is always the best part, getting impact people. So appreciate it.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And I'm sure that there'll be a lot of great nuggets of wisdom as folks go back and listen to this interview.
Absolutely.
So, in appreciation for you being our guest today, we'd like to plant 5 trees in your name.
Wow.
Training Pros charity is World Reforestation. So, we've been doing this for quite a while. We have over 3,500 trees now, and we'll add your 5 trees to that number. So,
Yay.
thank you so much. We really appreciate you being our guest today.
That's fantastic. Thank y'all for doing that. That's fantastic.
Of course. So this concludes our episode of the Learning Leader Spotlight with Zach. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of Learning Leader Spotlight, interviews with corporate L&D leaders. You'll find links in the show notes to any resources mentioned on today's show. If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe so you never miss an episode and leave us a 5-star review.